Hello, this is Virtualis the Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. When I play online games on chess.com, I usually rely on the servers to make a random matchup. However, the match I'm going to talk about today was against a professional colleague and peer, and someone who I know in real life. Moreover, we played a game in the multi-day format where you could have up to several days to make a move, rather than a rapid live game. This ended up being a really fun and chaotic game with great moves and errors on both sides. In this game, I played the white pieces, so as usual, I open with the Vienna game. I hope you enjoy! So in this game, I played white, opponent black, and let's have a quick look at the review first. So, accuracy somewhere between a 60 to 70%, so I suppose not that great. And as you can see from this this evaluation curve by the algorithm, back and forth in a chaotic fashion. Now we each had sort of a mix of some great and good moves, and our fair share of inaccuracies and blunders as well. As per the bot, a wild, chaotic game on both sides. Let's have a quick look at the analysis now. Righty-o. So I played the Vienna. So e4, e5, knight c3, and my mate here played bishop c5 as a response, the Anderson defense. I played my bishop to c4, and already the stockfish is suggesting an early queen move out in preference to the bishop. So I had a quick look at what this was actually about, and basically what the computer wants is to bring queen out. That would be a very normal move afterwards. Then bring out the bishop. Threatening scholar's mate. Of course, that you don't want to do that, and so you would play g6, and then bringing your queen all the way back to d1, and effectively just going through that sequence to potentially damage the opponent's pawn structure. So this is. I think if you played like that in real life, you deserve to get a punch, I think. So, they're sort of computer moves. I don't play like that. And instead, here I played, I think, the much more natural looking bishop c4. Opponent plays d6. I develop knight to e2. Opponent now plays bishop g4, potentially with a pin on that knight to the queen. That's okay. I short castles. Opponent develops knight f6, and now I ask the question, what are they going to do with that bishop? I sort of expect that probably they'll take, and my mate did, and the logical thing to do here is to take back with queen, developing the queen as well. Opponent short castles. I play d3. Sort of, I suppose, a good move by the opponent, playing h6, preventing a potential sort of pin of their own. And here I play knight a4 with an attack on the other bishop. Opponent plays b6, which is probably not the best move. So understanding that that bishop's probably dead either way, it's probably better for the bishop to go back to b6. And so when there's a capture, you open up the file for the rook. So I was quite happy to do a trade trade the knight for the bishop, and in doing so, potential damaging of the opponent's pawn structure. But really only very slightly ahead. F4 is now possible, pushing forward, protected by that bishop. Opponent develops their other knight, c6. I play c3, so a sort of diagonal attacking piece 2 squares away from the knight is often good. So prevents those sort of moves. So it controls the mobility of the knight. Opponent captures pawn with their e pawn, and I capture back with my bishop. And I'm reasonably happy in this position. Opponent brings their knight back, so rotates towards the king side, so knight e7. And here I start to lose most of my advantage, pushing my g pawn to g4. Now, the Stockfish reckons that was a good move. And when I sort of analyze this afterwards, yep, I can see why that's the case. Captures, and that gets rid of the defense of that knight, and also the defense of the king is now potentially critically damaged. And as you can see, that's very, very advantageous for white. But I didn't see that in the game. So I played that pawn move, which was bad. Opponent pushes their pawn in response, which you know, this is part of the chaotic part of the nature of the game. So this is also bad. And at this point, I still have the opportunity of doing a similar move before. So capture knight, and again, the defense around the king is damaged. But just like last time, I didn't see that either. So opponent plays g5. Here I retreat my bishop to d2. Opponent pushes their d pawn, trying to crack open the center. Here, given that that knight is no longer defended by that pawn on the g file, I thought, well, free knight, let's capture. Opponent captures back my bishop. I thought that was potentially okay for me, that transformation. Now, at this part of the game, I think it was past midnight, and we were sort of playing, so even though it's kind of like correspondence chess, we were effectively sort of playing this fairly quickly, so in the middle of the night, after midnight. When I saw that move, I thought that the opponent probably had some sort of clever move, but I couldn't quite see what it was. So I played, I sort of centralized my other rook, lying them up for a battery. Now the opponent played their knight, pushing back, and this is where I saw, yep, that was a good move. And here I saw that I was going to end up trading one of my rooks for the knight. Eventually what I ended up doing was capturing with the bishop. However, it would have been better to capture with the rook, given that rook is under attack in that direction from the queen. So this is the transformation that ended up happening. However, the better transformation would have been to take the knight with the rook, captures back, captures, and the main reason why this is potentially better is that the queen hasn't been developed into a position that's somewhat more aggressive. And so in this position, I would have been ahead, but in the actual game, what happened was I took with the bishop, captures. I'll capture that pawn, retreat, and back. And in this position, this transformation, my opponent, my mate, is actually ahead. And now the opponent has both rooks and a queen. I have a rook and a bishop and a queen. So I am definitely at a disadvantage here. My main advantage potentially is that I have got potentially a passed pawn, and that potentially counts for something. So opponent pushes f6. I now place my rook, apparently, you know, the best move, and we're sort of fairly equal now. And this now provides an opportunity for that pawn, that passed pawn, well, potential passed pawn, to be pushed ahead. My mate plays king g7, which is probably not the best move. I push up my pawn to e5. They move their rook over, ostensibly a pretty good move, though Stockfish reckons I'm quite a bit ahead here. And the reason for that is now pawn can capture pawn with check, which is a potential powerful move. The opponent captures back with rook, and at this point I thought for quite a long time. I felt that there was probably some transformation that makes sense here. What actually happened was that I overthunk this position, because the most obvious set of moves here is actually just queen takes queen with check. that has to be captured back. Then you have bishop in that position, pinning the rook, which means the only logical move here is rook captures bishop, rook captures rook, and now we're in a rook and pawn endgame where I am up a couple of pawns, which should put me substantially ahead. Now, that was probably the most obvious set of moves, given the queens are facing each other. Whack the queen first. However, I somehow I miscalculated, and I thought that sequence was going to be bad for me. So I actually ended up playing bishop in that move first. And as you can see, automatically I am much, much worse. Now, the opponent plays the correct move here. So this is still a fairly tricky position for my mate to navigate. But no, moving that king back out of the way, which is why that original move, king to g7, wasn't a good move. Here I capture, so rook captures rook. And at this point, I think my opponent makes the wrong move. So the opponent, I think, could have captured. I'm sort of forced to capture back, and then rook captures queen. And so in the end, they still have their queen. I have a bishop left over. Bishop versus queen, definitely losing position. However, I was very lucky. I suspect my mate was pretty tired. Again, this was in the middle of the night. They captured the bishop first, which was actually an error because that allows me to have queen captures queen. They captured queen back. I also now finish by capturing a pawn. And now this is an endgame in which, again, a rook and pawn endgame where I have more pawns. So rook and pawn endgame, yeah, and I have more pawns. So I should technically be winning in this position. Though transforming rook to and pawn endgames to actual wins is, as you will see, not that simple. Opponent, my mate makes the right move, immediately sort of threatening some of my pawns, and also rooks on the 2nd and 7th ranks are powerful. I now give a check, capture that pawn, they capture, I capture the other pawn, they capture. So at the moment, I have 4 pawns, opponent 1 pawn. However, I need to turn this into a win. Again, better said than done. I give a check, but that really doesn't achieve very much. And I try to now advance my c pawn. So the c file, these are passed pawns. I really need to protect those pawns. Opponent pushes their, places their rook onto a6, disallowing the next move by my pawn. My goal was to try to pop the rook in that position. So one of the ways I can potentially win is if I can trade away the rooks, then I should be winning. Just with having a large pawn majority, I should win. However, my mate, he's a clever man, so he wasn't going to let me just do that. So of course that, but I still here have check. Moves the king. I now can advance my c pawn forward again. And I sort of technically knew that it should be possible for the opponent to stop a pawn advance with just 1 rook. However, they managed to do it anyway. And this is where I made a mistake. Basically, getting a passed pawn to the 7th rank is really powerful. Effectively, that usually will lead to a trade of a rook for a pawn. So my next obvious move really should have been to play c7. But for some reason, I don't know why, I decided to bring the other pawn first. And just to see what that should have looked like, I should have played this. If the opponent then tries to prevent promotion, I now can play rook to d8 with check. Opponent is sort of forced to move their king out of the way. And now that promotes to queen, captures. And basically what I've done is I've traded one of my pawns for the rook. And in this position, it should be very easy to win. So that was the obvious move. Obvious moves are not that obvious in the middle of the night. actually ended up happening, now let's go back to the actual game. So I played c6, opponent moved the king, and this is that that very erroneous move, moving the c pawn, right? The pawn to c4 rather than just pushing straight to c7. And now, of course, an attack on both pawns. I can't protect both of them. So I gave a check, force the king out of the way, check again, and a check, and at least now I can whack that pawn. So now the opponent has no pawns left. Right, so I knew I stuffed up this side. Definitely that shouldn't have happened, but I still have 2 pawns, still have a rook. I should be somehow be able to promote at least one of those pawns. So check, and now bringing my rook to try to advance the pawns on the G and H file. And I come close to almost stuffing it up here as well. And really, this was a mistake. So what I should have done is to bring my king in front of my pawns, and basically the king needs to lead the charge, because then that pushes basically the enemy king out of the way. However, I made the wrong move. And the opponent now has, can basically hassle my king from the backside. So forced to move here. Here I made, I don't know what I was thinking. I was thinking somehow I could protect both of these pawns with the knight, but of course that doesn't really work. So that's why it was such a blunder. And yeah, this is even a worse blunder, severely losing my advantage. And as I was calculating this, I think this was like 2 or 3 in the morning, I was actually thinking, is this a draw? I was almost convincing myself that I ended up with a draw. Luckily, I think around this point, my mate said, hey, it's pretty late. Let's continue the game tomorrow. And so I managed to get a bit of a rest. And the next day when I looked at the position again, I was feeling happier. I was feeling, yeah, I think I should definitely be able to win this. So opponent does a good move, trying to block the advance with their king. Now I need to sort of move my king and maneuver the king so that I can get that, get some of the rook out of the way. And here the opponent made an error by bringing their rook into this complex here, so reducing the mobility of their rook. So able to give a check. Obviously the rook is protected. King forced away. Now his side. Now the king is basically forced behind my pawns. And with my pawns moving forward, it means that if I ever get a break, have a break with the leading pawn, there's no way the king can catch up and prevent promotion. So I was very happy with this transformation. And with the opponent not being able to give me a check on that turn, now allows me to push another one of my pawns forward, so g6. And here I thought I had an opportunity to basically just to potentially chase down the opponent's rook. And again, they were forced to make a move without check. And again, that allows me to push forward another pawn. And even if the opponent brings their king here with a potential threat of the rook, I can simply now put my rook, advance my rook forward. Again, I'm very happy with a rook trade if I could accomplish that, because that would be a win. Opponent moves their king to f5, which probably doesn't help. Here, I'm sort of inviting, please, a rook trade, but the opponent was too clever for that. And again, now trying to chase down the rook. And again, without a check, I can advance another pawn forward. Opponent gives another check. Here, again, I'm forcing the question. Are they going to trade? So if I do trade, then, and that's what they did, now it's basically a king and rook versus king endgame, and this endgame is basically winning for me. And basically the way to win, and so in this position, my mate resigned, thankfully. No, this was a fairly long game already, so move 73. But once you get to king and rook versus king, it's definitely forced mate, and there's a simple pattern to achieve that. Basically trying to get king opposition, and then the rook can go onto the same row or the rank as the opponent king, and then that's checkmate. So what that might look like would be, so the king would always want to try to chase down that rook to see whether or not you mismove and make a blunder. So something like this. and basically trying to get opposition. And here, of course, I have to move the rook back out of the way. And the opponent might try to move back. And here I can make another move because we want the opponent to be forced to put their king into opposition against my king. So obviously they can't go there, otherwise that's automatically checkmate. So there, 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 forced move now, and then checkmate. So that's how you would checkmate with rook and king against king. That was such an interesting game. When I analysed this, there were so many things to learn, and I sort of recognised that I'm just not so good with rook and pawn endgames, and that's something I need to study further. Anyway, GG, great game with my mate. I still find rook and pawn endgames very challenging, and I blundered away my advantage on one side of the board and almost blundered on the other side as well. One of the unsettling scenarios in chess endgames is knowing that you should have a winning position, but not being able to work out how to convert. My mate and I had a rematch where he played white and I black. This will be published tomorrow. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.